Welcome to the Break the Cycle Podcast. On this week's episode, we are going to be diving into fear. It can be scary to dive into fear sometimes, but we are going to be discussing all things uncertainty, anxiety, doubt, and insecurity, how those things present themselves on a daily basis within our own lives, maybe some things that you can relate to, and also how to discern when fear is simply a illusion versus when it's legitimate and it's a hot stove and you don't want to touch it. Join us on this week's episode.
We're joined with Zohreh, our head of care coordination. She is my West Coast mother and now Danny's West Coast mother as well. And she is filling in for Kyla, who is sick today. So she will be giving us a good dose of perspective as a mother of two and someone who's successfully worked through fear. Zohreh, when was the last time you experienced fear?
Today.
What happened?
Yesterday, when you asked me to come on the podcast.
Okay. Walk me through that. Why were you afraid?
Because I just don't think that I can, I'm able to talk about certain things, Sometimes I get stuck.
So it was like a fear of being vulnerable, maybe? Or articulate, would you say?
Articulate. Yeah.
How'd you work through that fear?
But I faced my fear.
How'd you work through it?
I said, fuck it, I'm doing it.
Fuck it. That's a really good response to fear sometimes.
It is. Fuck it. Yeah.
What's
the worst thing that could happen?
That's a great question. What's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah.
And it's like death. And if you die, and you know where you're going, it's not that scary.
But you're not going to die from doing a podcast, so here you are.
Yeah.
Zohreh Cheyenne, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah.
Zohreh is our head of care coordination here at Cycle Health. We've known each other for 3 years and counting, and she is my mother on the West Coast. I called Zohreh the other day because I got into a little fender bender, and I was like, Zohreh, what do I do? It's like my mother's call. She's like, I got a contact, don't worry. I know the guy. But yeah, this episode's on fear and how fear could be very debilitating at times. It also could help you mobilize, talking about how we work through fear states, because fear can stop you from doing a lot of things that maybe is aligned with your highest self or will push you to get better. When was the last time you experienced fear, Danny?
The last time I experienced fear, I would say I experience fear on a daily basis as well. And for me, I define fear as like any uncertainty as well, or doubt, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You hear those words oftentimes grouped together. And I experience some iteration of that on a daily basis. I think there's a lot of variables in my life right now with this business and being out here in LA and trying to establish a solid foundation. And sometimes I feel insecure or compare myself to others. And I would say that that's a derivative of fear in some regard. Fear of failure, fear of not being successful, fear of lack of connection. And yeah, that's what I would say.
How is fear showing up today?
Today, for example, fear has shown up, I would say, to kind of piggyback off what Zohreh is saying. Anytime we do the podcast, it's like just having to set out the whole day and then fearful that maybe I'm missing important messages or meetings or tasks. Almost forgot to do payroll today, but got it in.
It's important.
So I was a little scared that I might forget that, but I remembered to do it. Yeah, things like that. Like subtle, I think fear doesn't have to be as dramatic as thinking you're going to die. It shows up in subtle ways sometimes.
Yeah, some of the most unexpected ways.
Yeah. What about you? When's the last time you experienced fear?
I don't experience fear.
I know.
I'm invincible.
That's a great mask.
It's really secure in the mask. I definitely experience fear. I think I experienced fear today. But I like to look at these things on like, why is this necessarily coming up? And I feel like any type of emotion that's felt viscerally is leading you back to some answer. Could be preconditioned, could be ways that maybe you showed up in the past that are unhealthy cycles or habits. that is an opportunity to grow. So I think with any negative emotion, which like is fear negative inherently, I guess, but it also allows you to introspect.
Shine a light on where maybe you need some confidence or self-assurance, self-acceptance.
Yeah. Internal curiosity.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting as well is that I think ultimately fear does boil down to the fear of death, but not necessarily a physical death. For example, sometimes we feel fear of the death of the ego, right? Or the death of a connection. Like, for example, in the use case of this podcast and, you know, being fearful that I'm missing out on an important Slack or a task, like it's the fear of the death of a connection, right? Or like being able to like neglecting something that I'm otherwise supposed to focus on, and that project dying out a little bit, you know what I mean, or taking a hit. But ultimately it is a form of, I think, a fear of death. It's just maybe physical or financial, the death of an ego, friendship, etc. You know,
It's interesting that you connotate fear and death.
yeah, I think because to your point, like sometimes I think almost always fear is a visceral response, right? And that's something that's hard coded into our DNA, ultimately for survival. But survival of what, right? Survival of the physical body, of the emotional state, of the ego, of the financial state, what have you, some form of survival, right? And fear is ultimately, that's the objective of it. And it's actually healthy in some regard because you need to survive, right? But it can also impair you as well.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I feel like fear is something that we've been programmed, you know, like from childhood. Like our parents, like some parents are like, don't do that, you're gonna fall, don't do that, you know, and it's like programmed into you, like don't don't go out late because someone might kidnap you.
And you, whenever you see babies, they like are absent of fear in a way. And then they like, it's like touching the hot stove and then getting burned. And then you like look to your parent and then you see their reaction, then you mirror that said reaction, you know? So like you wonder if fear is innate in every being, you know, but it is an emotion. Like
and it comes with anxiety too, you know?
For sure. And I think to right on your analogy, Elijah, it's like being able to determine what things in life are an actual hot stove where there's literally no point in keeping your hand on there, and which ones are just kind of an imaginary elusive hot stove. And it's actually like if you put your hand on harder, it's actually going to end up turning into, you know, whatever it turns into. It's like, how do you transcend that initial visceral response, that knee-jerk reaction, and breathe through the fear, if you will, to be able to, you know, discern which things are worth breathing through versus, you know, turning your back away from and heading in the opposite direction. I think that's a really difficult component to fear.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that are in a, you know, in a place where they stuck because of fear, you know?
Exactly.
Relationship, job, you know, living where they're living, you know, they're scared to move. They're scared to move their jobs. They're scared to jump into, you know, they're scared to leave their relationship. So
yeah, how do you discern when the fear is legitimate and you should listen to it, and where you actually need to like ignore it and double down, actually, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where I've had some of the biggest mistakes of my life, is where I've doubled down on the wrong things, thinking that maybe it was a fear that was misguided or reactive, or on the inverse, listening to a fear that maybe was preventing me from reaching my potential and actually taking a risk that would have been in my best interest. So it's a difficult balance, and being able to make that discernment, I think, is ultimately the what determines your success as an individual. How do you make that discernment, Elijah, between which fear is legitimate and which fear is just your knee-jerk reaction, maybe from childhood or a visceral response?
I think it's like a gut instinct, you know? I think fear is very elusive. I mean, for me at least, I really trust my gut. And I think that I really try to like sit in and be like, all right, is this like a rumination? Is this like a past perception? Is this projecting? Why is this showing up? Why is this coming up? And trying to really listen to the gut, I think is the way that I kind of work through that. Because I think fear is like very real at times. And then at other times, like it could be extremely debilitating.
Yeah.
So you almost have to discern. But then I think, again, like kind of tracking back. Where is this fear coming from? Why is it showing up? And
I think there's signs too. Like if you're in a bad job and you got a toxic, boss, or you're just miserable, that's telling you you've got to, move on, It's telling you that you've got to, there is something else out there for you. And people are scared of change. They're scared financially. What if? But I feel like that fear is programmed into us, by, work or like people that we work with, or but you should ignore that if you're in a toxic environment.
For sure. Yeah. And then I guess the question becomes, to use the work example, like let's say you get a new job, right? And it's really difficult and that makes you feel stressed and fearful that you're not going to perform, etc. Like maybe in that instance, like it could be toxic in that you're constantly, releasing cortisol in that fight or flight state, on your toes, not knowing what's going to happen, if you're going to succeed, if you're going to fail. But you may need to just double down, and trust yourself. Whereas maybe it's just not right for you either, right? And you actually need to leave. So it's a difficult thing to discern. And to your point, Elijah, with the gut instinct, even that, right? A visceral instinctual response essentially is a gut instinct in a lot of ways, right? It can be reactive, or it's like the difference between like intuition and then also like, and that's where I think you're speaking to more of that, like just listening to my intuition. But I feel like it's so easy to get confused between your intuition and then also maybe something that's just holding you back, and it's like, actually it's not, something you should listen to.
Yeah, I think the phrase that plays in my head is contrast isn't supposed to last, it's supposed to teach you something. And I think, how long has that fear been around? And again, why is it showing up at your door?
It's like another little person in your head saying, you won't be able to do this. You won't find another job. You won't be able to leave this person. You're going to be financially in terrible place. Something keeps telling you, and we listen to it, we have to ignore it.
Yeah, exactly. See, that could be construed as a gut response, right? But in reality, it's actually limiting you.
Yeah.
Where on the inverse, it's like, oh, I won't be able to stay with this person, or this person's going to leave me, right? And then you're having fear on the opposite direction. I won't be able to perform in this job, right? So it's really difficult to discern. But I think ultimately, if you just really connect with, as cliche as it sounds, just like connect with your inner self and like be still, be able to really let the dust settle. Like it takes time, not following that, maybe that initial right off the bat knee-jerk reaction, but seeing if that persists throughout days, maybe give it a few days or a week even, give it time. I think intuition plus time is ultimately what creates that discernment that's going to lead you in the right direction.
I disagree. Trust that gut instinct and run with it. No, I'm just kidding. Discern it. I think also testing boundaries of fears as well. Like I realized it was a rough place first 18 years. I was like, want to get out, want to establish myself somewhere else. So I came to California, did my 4 years at university. And then I was like, okay, this really worked. I became like a pretty decent human, and I feel like I grew a lot. Where can I almost throw myself in deeper to continue to expand myself, right? Because if my thought was, if I get thrown into any situation or setting, I'll have the ability to adapt, which was one of the reasons why I ended up moving to China after graduating. And thinking, okay, let me just toss myself into this environment. And if you could fucking survive China, dude, you could do anything. You know what I mean? Draw me anywhere in the world and I could do it. So I think also like testing those abilities as well with fear. Find ways to push yourself in areas, and then you start to learn like resistance. And I related a lot also like working out, like doing spin, turning up the resistance, on a treadmill, turning it up, weights, turning it up. Like that physical connection to an emotional state also makes that connection. If you could withstand more, you could push yourself in uncomfortable situations physically. That also, shows up in other areas of your life as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is really well construed by the concept of acute stress versus chronic stress. Acute stress being putting yourself under a subtle and measurable calculated amount of resistance or stress in order to increase your threshold or your ability to transcend said stress, like increasing the weight to increase your strength, increasing the speed to increase your speed. Those sort of concepts are like even taking a cold shower, right? It's very uncomfortable, but it also allows you to be more focused and more disciplined and more at peace throughout the day, right? Whereas chronic stress, something where you're putting yourself into perpetuity on a consistent basis under this stress that isn't good for you, right? Taking a cold shower for 3 hours straight is going to leave you with hypothermia, right? So being able to make that discernment as well, I think is really important. But what do you think, Zohreh? Do you think that in order to transcend fear, it's just a matter of like listening to your intuition and then just seeing if that intuition persists over a few days? And like, how do you make those decisions for yourself? Do you give it time, or do you just go right out the gate to your initial reaction?
I talk to my close friends.
Good answer.
I think that's really important when you talk to your close friends, because they see things in you that you don't see in you, and they see the beautiful things in you, and they remind you, like, you're strong, you're smart, you can do anything you want to put your mind to. And that gives you confidence, and that gives you some feedback, and then you think about it and you're like, okay, they're right, I should move on. It's really important to speak to the right people, I always do that. I speak to my close friends.
Yeah, getting like other input from people that love and care about you, I think is really important.
Yeah.
For sure. And then on your end, Elijah, you just your gut instinct usually, like, is what you'll run with?
No, I'm being sarcastic. I think that it just depends on the situation. Like, if fear is there, I try to push through the fear, But yeah, just thinking like, is it like, yo, this is a sign, like, take this for what it is, or like, are these things that may have developed in your past that are now showing themselves, and how do you work through those things, So I think it's situational.
Seeing if there's like a pattern of the behavior as well.
Yeah, because I feel like if you're fearful of like one thing or like something, it's going to come up again and again. It's going to show its face in various ways, whether it's in like a relational dynamic, financial, like you could have fears in different sectors of your life, but also like it may come back to the same root, like i.e. like fear of loss of control, or fear that things are going to go terribly wrong. Like that fear is going to show up in various areas.
For sure. Are there any reoccurring fears for either of you that have been like a constant theme in your life that you're like, damn, like, okay, and you're finally starting to kind of see some light? Or
Well, I feel like every time that I pushed through fear, it was good for me. There wasn't any time that I faced my fear and it wasn't good for me. So I really believe that if you face your fear and push through, you're going to find something that's good for you, or you're going to be somewhere that's good for you,
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment, but I do think that sometimes, like I said, fear is ultimately like something that's wired into our DNA, and it's made for us to survive. So there are certain things where you don't want to keep your hand on the stove, per se.
Well, I'll give you an example.
Sure.
So when I was offered the job for the ketamine clinic,
Yeah.
I said to myself, there's no way I can do this, you know? And I spoke to my friends about it. I was like, I have no experience in this. Like, there's no way I can do this.
Yeah.
And they, you know, I was scared. I was like, I was going to say no,
Yeah.
you know? And they told me, Zohreh, you're the most empathetic person. You're so good at listening. They pointed out all my strengths, you know? And that's when it got me realizing, okay, maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then but I had fear, you know?
For sure.
And that's why I think it's really important that people, like whoever speaks to someone close to them and gets advice, because, you know, someone that cares and you trust and gets advice, because that will make you don't really think about the good things about yourself.
Yeah. They'll be able to help you discern whether or not it's legitimate or not. What about you, Elijah? Are there any reoccurring themes for you?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think fear of control is always a thing. I like to have my own destiny at hand. So I feel like sometimes I'm like, want things to work in a certain way in various areas of my life, or I have expectations that things should work in certain ways. And if it doesn't go a certain way, then I'm like, I'm not overcome with fear. I think the fear manifests itself as anxiety, like in a lot of anxiety, and like functional anxiety, but more like rumination, right? So I think like, what is going to happen? How is this going to happen? How will this play out in the long run or the long term? And kind of these like different scenarios play in my head. And I think in a lot of ways that it's good in a sense, because I'm trying to like analyze like each and every, like if it's this permutation versus another permutation versus another permutation, then I'm trying to like analyze it all, you know? But then also at the same time, like my fear of like loss of control also at times is debilitating. You kind of just have to let it go and be like, whatever is going to happen is going to happen. So I think I'm at odds at times where it's like, let it go, relax, like it's all going to work out the way it's supposed to work out, or like, no, double down, like cast your will and ensure that it's going to go a certain way. And then kind of getting stuck in between the two, and fear on, if I don't cast my will and it goes a certain way, then I don't have control. But if I cast my will and it goes a certain way and it doesn't work, then I was in control of the situation. So it's fine almost, you know?
Yeah, how do you make that discernment as to whether or not to cast your will, or like to what extent to cast your will, right? Because I think ultimately you need to be able to express what you want, right? Whether it's in a partnership or in a relationship, whatever it may be, and be able to set your boundaries and have standards and have an idea of what you want to cultivate. But also you need to be able to let go, to your point as well, and be able to introduce new variables that maybe have a lot of unknowns. How do you make that discernment?
You know, I still think that I'm figuring it out.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it's like an overnight thing. I think it's a matter of like various data points, and then being like, at what point, like, did I exert my control and maybe that like was a detriment to the situation or the individuals at hand, versus like, this is something that I'm feeling confident with. I think it's also confidence in like, in a like if it's me and another individual, like how much confidence do I have in the other person to be able to like get something done, or ensure that like it's going to be done to the way that I would do it or I would handle it, and I could like willingly, confidently hand off the baton, like that person's going to do it like up to my par, if not better, in said thing, right? So I know that, I'm confident in that, versus me being like, oh, I don't know if the way that they perceive this situation is best. And I think that that's really where the fear comes in. And then all the permutations on like, what if?
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, 100%.
It must be exhausting to run those permutations sometimes. You just like stay up late at night running all the different branches of what could happen, playing the scenarios in your head.
Yeah, it's kind of like the meme with the guy with the red pen. He's like...
The red pen.
Yeah, you know, and he's like circling all this stuff, and it's like
oh yeah, and he has the frizzy hair, and he's on a chalkboard.
Yeah, and his eyes are like
Yeah.
super odd.
I wish I was more like that. I wish I was
You think
more
so?
like, yeah.
I'm
I
like-
wish I looked. I wish I thought ahead. You know?
Really?
Yeah, because
Oh, I'm living in the future, for better or
That's-
for worse.
it's kind of a good thing to think ahead. You
Yeah.
know? But at the same time, that could stop you from doing things that might be great for you too.
100%. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. It's like
Yeah.
I love all the permutations, and that's how my head naturally runs, whether like nurture or nature. I don't fucking know why or how, but it's like I am casting in the future, and I am trying to be like, even what's the superhero who has the red cape? Doctor Strange. And he's like, there's 17,742 ways that this is going to operate, and like that's how like my head fucking works, you know?
Yeah.
And it's really horrible when all of those 17,000 ways don't work out and it's actually a completely different way. And then I'm like, I just dispensed off my gas tank. Like, what the fuck am I doing here? You know? But fear does that to you, you know? Or at least like the fear of the loss of control for me. Like that is how I guess I interact with fear. And it's not like I'm like, oh, I'm spooked on what's going to happen. Because I'm like a man of faith and I believe and I'm confident in the route that I'm going. And I'm a believer in momentum and like divine intervention, angels we talked about last episode.
Yeah.
But also like you have that like human pea brain and you're like, it must go this way.
Causes a lot of anxiety, man.
Yeah.
It's a lot of anxiety.
Yeah. And it's funny how some people have it like on the other side of that, where it's like debilitating fear on like, what's the worst that happens, you know?
Yeah.
And like, they can't even move because of that.
Yeah.
Versus me thinking of the infinite possible ways that something can happen. And how two people can be on like two different spectrums of this idea of like fear, you know?
Yeah.
So what would be the opposite end of the spectrum versus running all the permutations, running none of them?
I think running none of them or being like having a doom and gloom mentality on it, like it only could go horrible.
Yeah. For me, I feel like a reoccurring theme that has come up in terms of fear is like fear of failure is like probably the biggest thing, because I grew up like in a lower middle income household. My parents were like migrants from Brazil, and I always wanted to be like successful, to be able to take care of them as they transition into their elderly age. And now they're getting older. You know, my dad just retired, and I feel like that pressure is mounting, you know, because I always had this dream to like just take them on like a world tour and show them the world, because they haven't really traveled much. And like having the fear of like not being able to do that for them is something that I suffer with like on a daily basis. I would say another daily fear for me. Yeah.
That you're going to fail.
Yeah. And I think that that's like,
But failure is inevitable.
yeah, but I mean, I would hate to fail at that. You know what I mean? Like
What?
I had not being able to provide like a beautiful end of life for my parents, you know?
What if you don't?
I don't know. Then I would consider myself a failure for sure. You know, like if they just unexpectedly died like before 70, then I'd be like, okay, like it just wasn't in God's cards. But if they live into like their late 70s, 80 plus, whatever it is, and I'm not able to do that in the next like half decade to 15 years, I would honestly be like, yeah, I would consider myself a failure. So that's where like that daily fear comes in for me, and it like shows itself in things like, you know, doing the podcast and being fearful that we're not tending to the operations or whatever it may be. But I think being able to see the long-term dividends of things like the podcast and see that it's like not all on my shoulders, to be able to, it's not my responsibility to parent my parents in some regard, is important. But also I think it kind of is, you know, I don't know. That's just my take or what I struggle with daily. But
It doesn't have to be a responsibility. It just has to be something that you want to do, you know?
desire.
A desire that you want to take care of them because they took care of you and they gave you this amazing opportunity. So
They say like energy cannot be created or destroyed, and it's interesting because like they sacrifice so much, and now I feel accountable to sacrifice so much and take a lot of risk as well. You know what I mean? So it's like that energy just keeps on compounding like generationally. It's interesting. What about you, Elijah? Do you have any like fear of failure?
I think failure is a part of success. So I like don't think about it like that. Does that make sense?
So you don't?
No, Not really.
You're not afraid of the uncertainty of how things are going to work out?
No, I don't have that. I don't like, it doesn't keep me up at night. Like, is this going to work out? I'm like, I often talk about it with you when you were fearful about like starting cycle or like moving into cycle. I'm like, listen, mother rucker, I'm here. I'm showing up. This is my lane. And every day I'm going to show up. If somehow I end up homeless, I'll still show up. I'll still figure out a way. If I have to go back to the clinic and start like walking people to the back again, I'll do it again. Like, I know this is where I need to be.
Yeah, but I'm just curious because like sometimes I feel like you call me late at night and you're expressing fear of how it's going to work out. So that question was, are you ever afraid of how it's going to work out?
I think again, that's like the matter of like, for me, I don't have a fear of like how it's going to like, I'm not fearful that it
isn't going to work out.
Isn't going to work out.
Right.
Correct.
But how it's going to work out.
Yeah, but that's like the permutation things I was talking about.
It's kind of like letting go and being able to like, okay, it's going to work out.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of how.
It's a permutation thing.
Right.
Yeah. And I think we oscillate too. It's like sometimes you're fearful of things and I'm like, bro, relax. Like it's all relax. I think that I go through it as well. But that's what I think you need to have like a partner in that aspect, because it's like when doubt arises, being able to voice that and being like,
for sure. Yeah, that's been hugely beneficial for me.
Yeah, you got this.
Yeah, like I obviously cycle would not be where it's at without you and each other. But yeah, if I didn't have someone to like reinforce the mission in those times of uncertainty, there's no way it would be where it's at. You know, it's like, and I would say to anyone who's like trying to Zohreh's point, anyone who's trying to surmount a fear that they know, a mission that they have intrinsically, it's a matter of finding reinforcement and support from the people that love you and the people that are there for you. And if you have that, you could do anything.
Yeah. And also knowing that like sometimes people aren't like, hey, I'm fearful of this. I'm like experiencing fear right now, right? Fear doesn't show up like that. Fear shows up in anxiety. Fear shows up in projected anxiety. Fear shows up in different, maybe unexplainable behavior.
It's subtle. It's not explicit all the time.
Exactly. It's usually subtle, right?
Yeah.
Someone sometimes is in a fear state and they don't realize that they're in a fear state.
Yeah, sometimes people trigger your fear.
100%.
Like, you know, someone calls you and screams at you and, you know, threatens you, you know. People get so upset and anxious and fuck it.
Fuck it in a British accent.
Fuck it. You know, just laugh.
I think it's easier to giggle about it when you have perspective, right? When you've passed the point of the tip of the fear. You know, of course you'd be like, hee hee hee. But when you're in it and I'm like Doctor Stranging 17,000 ways on how this is going to work out, I would love to just be like, pause, giggle. Okay, we're good. You know what I mean? Like, oh,
it's
but
practice.
What I would love to do to press that button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's practice.
Well, I would say like if you have that confidence that it is going to work out, then how it's going to work out as long as you're showing up every day shouldn't be, you know, something that initiates that fear, you know, because you have the ultimate confidence, which really matters that it's going to work out. You know what I mean? The details of how to get there, it's like that's somewhat irrelevant. Obviously, to an extent, they matter on a daily, weekly basis. But, you know, trying to run these permutations out 6 years, you know, you're going to tire yourself out.
Yeah.
For sure. And easier said than done.
Easier said than done, for sure.
It's like a jigsaw puzzle, you know?
Yeah.
You just start trying to put the puzzle together and eventually you get it together, you know?
For sure. Yeah. I'm much more like you, Zohreh, where like I initially won't have any fear, and then sometimes I have like regrets that will disseminate, but like I just default trust. And we have this this concept that Elijah and I have ironed out of like, is someone like a default trust sort of person where they're just by nature they're just gonna open-heartedly accept someone and just try to connect with them, or are they like a default reject, or like a default like what like question, you know, at least be like standoffish a little bit, or cautious rather.
Are you default trust or default distrust?
I trust. I don't, you know, first I trust until they prove themselves to me wrong.
Like prove themselves wrong, and then you're like, I distrust.
Yeah.
Okay.
But sometimes there's like red flags.
Yeah.
From the beginning, and you're like, oh, there's something about this person I just can't, you know?
For a majority.
You're good at that. Elijah's good at pointing out like, oh, I don't like that person, you know, and he's always right.
Yeah, Danny and I talk about this often. I'm a
I think we're very trusting, you know, and
default
Elijah's
distrust.
like,
I'm like, what's the intention here? What's the thought? And I'll come off very warm and nice, and like I really put the best foot forward, but it's like I want to see a series of action prior to being like, oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I would rather be in a situation where like it's almost, I guess, in like sports or baseball or like even pickleball, like it's easier to take steps forward. It's harder to take step back.
Yeah.
So I would rather take steps forward slowly, because if the ball's over my head, I'm fucked, right? Or at least you're not fucked, but it's harder to turn around and run backwards versus take slow steps forward, in my opinion.
Yeah. And this has been, to Elijah's point, this has been something that we talk about often because we're on opposite ends of the spectrum, I feel like. And I think had we not been on opposite ends of the spectrum, cycle would never be where it's at, right? Because I never would have just like been so open to like, yeah, screw it, let's just do this. I'm gonna just like abandon everything else that I was doing, you know, fuck it, right? And Elijah, because Elijah already had so much momentum built up in this industry. He was working at the ketamine clinic. I had no experience in this industry, you know what I mean? And then on the antithesis, like if you weren't like really vetting me out and like, okay, can I trust this kid getting a true sense of my colors, like then, you know, this never would have happened either. So it's like,
it's funny how in some instances for me personally, like default distrust of people, default trust of the process. Like, and even I'm like, oh, I'm running these crazy variables. I'm like, I know it's going to work out. Like I shouldn't be running these variables and freaking out as much as I do, but I have a full like divine confidence that this is going to like show up in some way, shape, and form. But when it comes to people, like even when Danny and I first met, I was like, and I joke about it with my friend Marla, like we're like, let's suck the secrets out of the people. Like what makes them tick? Who are they? What does that look like? And then once I have all the information, all the data points, and I'm like, okay, I could, you know, this is a good person. And when Danny was like, I'm Mormon, like standing up for certain things, just the way that he showed up in certain relationships, he was just like default trust, like very pure, you know where you stood with him, going to communicate directly. And that's like really nice, but I feel like some people could see that. And there's been people in your life over the relationship that we, you know, have had that have come in and like taken that like trust almost as a weakness and like taken that and ran with it.
Sure. Yeah. I feel like I've been exploited in some regard because of that. But I think to Zohreh's point, once someone shows me the true colors, then, you know, and something that I'm working on is like, okay, like, you know, but I definitely give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's something that I'm continually working on is like setting those boundaries, if you will. But you mentioned something interesting where it's like, because I was default trust, you're like, oh, this kid is an open book, you know, like I can read him, you know, per se. But how do you clash with someone who's maybe the same as you, right? Or standoffish? And how does being default trust also impair your ability to develop real close, intimate connections, if at all?
Yeah, I think that's a great question with the trust thing. And I do think that there's an element of like fear involved in it, because I'm like, what is to happen? And like, if you open yourself up too quickly, like you are opening yourself up to be exposed.
Yeah,
you know,
you're vulnerable.
Yeah, you're vulnerable. You're to be hurt.
Sure.
I think like Madison's a perfect example. It's someone that we used to work with, and like East Coast, very straightforward, direct. And if I start to see like consistent patterns, like if you're like, I'm going to show up at this time, this date, I'm going to show up by sending you X, I'm going to do what I say, right? I take that for like, that's like face value. And I could start to see various, even if I'm like at first, like, who is this person? I like to see patterns of consistency. And if you show like erratic behavior in various places, I'm like, very wary.
Because there's a lot of variables.
And I'm like, still Chinese checkering.
Could be a
Chinese calculator.
A bomb, right?
I cannot be around unpredictable people.
Yeah, it's like
just
fight or flight.
Yeah.
I'm like clenched up. But those people usually aren't like stable or like good people usually.
I mean, maybe they're going through a crisis too, and that's where it's like, at what degree do you have compassion for people? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that you speak with, Zohreh, that are quote unquote unpredictable or unstable, right?
Yeah,
Does that
but
make them a bad
I'm
person?
on the phone with them.
Yeah.
I can't be in a relationship with someone that's unpredictable or be friends with someone that's unpredictable.
And in the beginning, you were unpredictable. You were like in a really dark place.
But was I unpredictable? As in, like, it's not like I was like hurting anyone or
you weren't hurting
like,
anyone, but at days you'd be
anything.
like, I'm really depressed, like extremely depressed. And then I would see you and you're like, oh, I'm happy, I'm good. Like you would almost have like high highs, low lows, but like still consistent with behavior. You know what I mean? Like you overall
exactly. That's what I'm getting at, is that like just because your mood is unpredictable or volatile doesn't make you a bad person. You know what I mean?
No, I mean, no one I don't think is like an inherently bad person.
I see that I disagree with. I think there are some people that are bad people.
There's some people that like, 1 minute they're like, they're all nice and they're like, and then the next minute something triggers them and they go crazy.
Yeah, for sure.
Like even, that I can't.
Yeah,
like
code switching. If someone acts a certain way to you versus a certain way to somebody else and I see both sides, I'm usually like, who are you going to act like in a different setting when I'm not there?
Yeah.
Right. And those types of behaviors are like, they're micro communication. It's like micro messages. But like looking at all these pieces and doing that kind of analyzation, being like, is this someone to take steps towards or take steps away from?
Yeah. That's the ultimate question you have to ask yourself. We've talked a lot about like how that presents in a work setting, but how does that present in, because I'm curious, Zohreh and I are on this couch and we are default trust people, but in like a romantic setting or a relationship setting, how does being default distrust affect that capacity to build intimacy?
Yeah, I think it really depends. I think still like vetting people out is always important, and then opening yourself up is always really important. But when it comes to distrust, I think that you're still looking for these like meta messages to ensure that that individual is safe and secure. I think that that's really the thing. So it's still kind of same concept, whether it's like work or friends. It's still kind of like ensuring like healthy behaviors that are showing up kind of like time in, time again. And then taking steps towards that, I think, in an intimate setting, Yeah.
Like,
I mean, that's like, I guess how I see it. What do you think, Zohreh?
I think for me, consistency and just showing up, someone that shows up and is always like, they're consistent, when they're talking to you, when you're asking for advice, if you don't pick up the call or if you're busy for a few days and you don't call them, they don't go crazy, like someone that's understanding, and compassionate and, patient. That's really important for me.
Yeah.
If I see anything other than that, I get, it's a red flag.
Red flags for sure. Yeah, there's fear involved, I think, probably on the other person's part. And they're...
Yeah.
And that triggers fear within you, and you don't want to be in a fearful relationship. Yeah. But can you really, truly ensure that that person is safe and secure? I think that's another question too. It's like, you're never really going to have that absolute, unwavering certainty 100%. Well, I take that back. I think you can, when those people are essentially your soulmates, right? Those are the people that are the wives, the husbands, the co-founders, right? The investors. Like when you're like taking that step into bed with someone financially, romantically, etc. That's like, divine intervention in some regard. But then there's so many side characters too, right? That you can't really discern whether with 100% certainty that they're going to be safe and secure per se. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's fear in any type of way when you open yourself up, as mentioned, like there's vulnerability there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And fear is very real in various settings, whether it's a work setting or romantic relationship.
And like for me at this age, like it's nice to have new friends, but honestly, I feel like I have everyone that I need in my life.
For sure.
And living in LA, especially, like, we don't get the most genuine people.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, flaky, fake, like, you
Lacking
know.
consistency.
So I feel like I'm so blessed living in LA, but having amazing friends.
Yeah.
And, you know, just that's all I need. I have like a handful of good friends, and that's all I need.
Yeah.
You know? That's all you need.
That's all you really
You
need.
just need one or two or three good friends you can talk to,
Yeah.
you know, and hang out with and be yourself with.
Yeah, quality over quantity for sure.
Quality over quantity is
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Porque los dos, though, if you can make that happen. But I think in order to do that, you really have to have the balance between default trust and default distrust.
I think it's also time too, time and energy poured into relationships over series and time. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? That takes time in itself.
Yeah.
Have you ever met, Zohreh, someone that you became like fast friends with or got into a relationship with, and then fear held you back from developing that relationship further?
Yes, definitely. What, you want me to tell you more?
Yeah. So we're sitting on this couch.
Yeah. It's been more than one person.
It's multiple offenses.
So yeah, there are times where like I've met people that I really enjoy my time with, but I've seen a few things that, you know, made me reluctant to move forward, you know, because I'm at an age where I've had enough experience.
How old are you?
47.
You look like you are 27.
I'm going to be 48 in December, and I'm proud of it.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And it is December. What am I
Yeah.
talking about? In a few weeks. But yeah, I'm at an age where I don't have the patience to train anyone or to, you know,
Coach anyone through it?
yeah, I don't, and I don't need it. You know, I have good friends, amazing friends. I will work with amazing people. I have, you know, good family. My brother is my backbone. Like, I really don't need new friends.
Yeah.
If you want to be my friend, you better be, you know, consistent, reliable, just like I am, and, you know, genuine.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise don't even show up. I don't
Do you
want
feel like you've cut off things like prematurely seeing fear?
I have no regrets. Let's put it that way.
Okay. That's a good place to be.
She's default trust, you know, so I think that she probably is, right? Like if you're default trust, if someone connects with you, then
Yeah,
it's like, we'll ride this until I get some really dark red flags.
exactly. Yeah.
But then
So-
also keeping in mind, nobody's perfect either, you know? So everyone has their own beige, orange flags.
and everyone can tolerate certain things. Like you can tolerate things that I won't be able to tolerate. I can tolerate things you won't be able
Right.
to tolerate. You know, everyone.
So subjective.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, it varies from person to person. Being
Yeah.
able to respect other people's disposition, and then also being able to exert yours as well.
Yeah. What triggers
Mm-hmm.
are pre-designed in you? And does that person trigger said things? You know?
Yeah.
Trigger
Good
fear.
question.
Yeah.
Do you have an answer?
And I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm still
Yeah.
working on my permutations.
What triggers you, and how are you able to transcend those triggers? Ultimately discerning which ones are an actual hot stove and which ones are just an illusion.
My trigger comes from my mom, who, like, she used to talk when I was younger. She used to talk to me in this way, you know, sometimes I felt like it was a resentful way.
Yeah.
And now if someone talks to me in that tone,
Yeah.
whether it's family or friends,
Mm-hmm.
like I kind of like shut off, you know?
Yeah.
That's a really big trigger for me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I have my own too. I think growing up, like being like lower middle class, like borderline, like, you know, below the poverty level, like my parents were consistently pinching pennies. And I think as I've transitioned into adulthood, I've been like very financially oriented, and it's like played a big part of my identity, whether or not how many zeros I have in my bank account. And I think to a fault, where I think oftentimes where if you are so fearful, you get caught up in running the permutations per se. And that waste bandwidth, aside from actually just focusing on doing the work and just like showing up on what's at hand, you're worrying about the future. And then that ends up coming to fruition too. And you end up like unintentionally bringing what you were fearful of into your vicinity. And I've definitely had periods of that. And so I've been training myself how to just like let that go, you know, and being able to be calm while still being assertive and showing up every day, doing the work, and being the best that I can. But it's a perpetual process.
We create it.
Yeah.
Because we think of it so much.
Yeah. Exactly.
That we create it.
That you spend so much time thinking instead of doing, which like, and actually like working towards absolving the fear. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my trigger. But you're still thinking about your triggers. Still figuring it out, Elijah.
I would say one of my insecurities is like hyper masculine spaces. Just growing up and when I was like in situations where I was on like baseball teams, my father was just really difficult around sports, and it just made me feel like very inferior. So I think in those types of settings, it's usually something that's a bit more uncomfortable for me. So I'd say that those are at points like triggering like a hyper masculine, like a bro culture, you know. That is something that usually is like thrusts me back. But something I'm working through with the help of Danny, which is great. So shout out to that brotherhood.
Of course.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely one of my triggers. I think I have a bunch of them, you know, I'm going to be honest with you. I think the control thing is another one for me, where I feel like I don't have perceived control over the situation. That someone, I'm going to hand over the driver's seat and then they're going to drive in a different way that I don't expect, even though we may be getting to the end destination by the same way. It just might be a different path forward.
Yeah, it's like on Google Maps when they're the same distance, the same time, you know, and you're like, choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
You're getting to the same place anyways at the same amount of time.
Yeah, unless it's we're going to yoga at 7 p.m. and we took a wrong turn.
Yeah, if you take a wrong turn, then that's definitely disappointing. But
did I mention them?
No.
Okay, tell me, come on.
Yeah, so I feel like you have a little bit of an abandonment trigger.
Okay, tell me how that shows up.
I see it sometimes when I'm like, I'm leaving, suddenly your face is like,
Well, Zohreh, it's just because you're so lovely and I want to listen to your British accent.
Or if Danny says I don't know, if Danny doesn't come into work, you get like, it's an abandonment
I rarely
trigger.
ever come into work, but it's also because you're his mother on the West Coast. You know what I mean? I think the dynamic between you and Elijah is beyond professional. I feel like you give him that reassurance, and I'm his brother too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And of course we work together, but we all love each other.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Don't leave me ever. Yeah, I mean, I think so, for sure. Definitely. I think I probably got a huge laundry list of other things.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have that one too, I feel like, because my mother was constantly hospitalized as a child. And so she would just be gone for like sometimes weeks, sometimes months, like, and it would just be me, my brother, and my dad. And I would be like, you know, getting rides to school. My mom wouldn't be there to take me, or I'd just be alone. And I think ultimately it's like the fear of being alone, you know? Yeah, especially like in a feminine dynamic, like when I'm in relationships, that's where like I'm still developing the tolerance to be able to know my boundaries and be able to stand on my own in confidence. But I always give people benefit to the doubt, sometimes to a fault, you know, when I'm giving them so many opportunities and they're just fucking me over, and I'm just like, but I love you, you know?
But I love you. I just Danny, that's
you know,
so cute.
Yeah, I think it's the mix in between the hyper independence, and then when you have the other side of that, it's codependency.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, that relates as codependency. And then I think on your end, it relates as hyper independence in some regard. Is that what you're saying?
Like, I think that, because I would say that you're relatively independent.
Yeah.
Until you have that connection that it could easily fall into a codependence.
Yeah.
To codependent
for
relationship.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's right.
You know what I mean? I think it's opposite sides of the spectrum.
I had really bad abandonment issues, really bad. And, you know, when in my 30s, because I never worked on it, I was, you know, I was busy and being a mom, and, you know, I didn't know I was married. I didn't know I had these issues. And I learned that I had this bad abandonment issues in a relationship. After I got divorced. A few years later, I met someone, and, you know, he triggered these abandonment issues. And I was like, what the fuck is this?
Isn't that the worst when you become aware of a problem and you're like, I'm this is who I am?
Yeah. And I was like,
how did that present itself? What
like
did that look
anxiety.
like? Yeah.
Like, you know, like I've never had that before. And it was, you know, I'm very careful about, I know my boundaries, and I know, you know, some girls, I feel bad because some girls haven't learned this, you know, and when they have, you know, when they're in a relationship and they're abandoned by their partner, they feel abandoned, they do things that will push the partner away, you know, like constantly call them, you know, show up where they are. And I was always, my mom always talked to me, and, you know, she always said, have respect for yourself, like, you know, So like, she taught me a lot, thank God, my mom. So when this was happening, you know, obviously, like, I wanted to call so bad. I wanted to, you know, show up
to the house,
you know,
like...
but I really controlled myself, and I just, and it was an 8-year relationship, and it was like, he would do this to me, like, and I don't think he was fearful. What is it? Fearful attachment?
Anxious avoidant.
Anxious avoidant. So it wasn't his fault. He had his issues, but like, I had my abandonment issues, and he was, you know,
Anxious
he
avoidant.
would
It's
avoid
a double negative.
What's
that
the
didn't
other
make
one?
a positive. Secure.
Anxious avoidant, and then there's
You have
the one that she's explaining that she was. What's that one?
that one is
It's anxious avoidant, and then there's also the
There's
one where
another
you're...
one.
no, it's anxious avoidant. Then you could have anxious avoidant, and then you could have a secure attachment style.
no, there's another one. He's right.
Okay, so you're saying that she was anxious attachment, and then he was avoidant, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I was anxious. Yes,
Yeah,
you're right.
and he was anxious avoidant.
Okay.
He was anxious avoidant. I was
Yeah.
Anxious.
Anyways,
anxious.
semantics.
Anyway, this was going on, you guys,
Yeah.
for 8 fucking years.
Yeah.
Like, it was on and off for 8 years.
Damn.
And I think I lost hair over this relationship.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
You know?
Stress. Yeah.
And one day I just said, you know, to myself, like, this is it. I cannot do this anymore, you know? And I walked out of the relationship, and it was very, very hard, so hard. And I felt the abandonment, even though I walked out, because I didn't feel like he even tried. And I think I healed myself by just reading about these abandonment issues and just, I think I healed myself, you know? I faced my fears about leaving, you know, being alone. How am I going to do it financially? I just walked out. I rented one room in a house, and had my daughter come live with me in that room.
Wow.
Yeah. And I just faced the fears, man. And I walked down the street, got a job
Yeah.
as an esthetician at a random place,
spot.
like really random
Yeah.
place. And
On the wall.
yeah, and I was like, some people are scared to leave,
Yeah. The
but
fear is debilitating.
fear is debilitating. But when you leave, I promise you, things get better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
For
path
you.
reveals itself.
Sometimes you have to go backwards to go forwards.
We are so back.
You know?
Yeah. But
We are
now I'm
so
healed from the
back.
abandonment. Like,
think
I
so?
don't have abandonment issues anymore. You know?
Yeah.
Like, if someone wants to leave, they can go, leave, fuck off. I don't need them.
Yeah.
You know? Someone's supposed to be in your life, they will be in your life. If they're not, you don't force it.
Yeah. Reciprocity will be present if they're meant to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. Once you really sit with that truth, I mean, and that's what I've been working on in my little single era now, my only single era for the last 3 years of adulthood, is just really sitting with that truth that if it's meant to be, reciprocity will be present, you know?
Yeah. I think different phases of your life call for different things as well, and allowing, if fear does arise, to like let it subdue, because you just might just be in a different era.
Yeah,
different
when
season of
you
your life.
when you starting a business, to be in a relationships, all of them, it is challenging because
Yeah.
you're getting to know each other. You know, there's games sometimes in the beginning.
For sure.
When you're running a business, you don't need that drama.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You want
I
to
don't
focus.
have the time or the bandwidth for
You
it.
want to focus, you know? So,
Yeah.
Yeah, you want people that will fill up the cup rather than deplete the cup,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And I feel like all the relationships that I've entered have typically been inspired by like a phase of like leisure, as in like it was either like spring break, you know, and I met this person, or I met them on a vacation, or it was summer holiday, you know, whatever it was, where you have time to invest in space, right? But like when you have your own priorities, being able to like pour into that and then be able to reinforce a relationship or cultivate that energy when you have the time and space,
Yeah.
you know?
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
Fear is scary at times, but we work through it. Look at us. We've made it this far onto this couch. Shout out to Zohreh for pushing through her fear today, showing up on that mic. I think you're a natural. I think on the other side of fear was A Star is Born, you know?
I would agree. Yeah. I think your voice too is very soothing. I love to listen to it, and I'm sure anyone listening does as well.
Oh, thanks, guys. You always give me confidence.
I think you have a lot of good life experience, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that we lack at times is just like perspective, time.
Being able to zoom out. Yeah.
Because we're looking at it from like our 20-something point of view. So it's just like,
Honestly, I wish I had the knowledge that I have now when I was your age.
I mean, yeah, I would love to
I would
sync up
be
with.
so much in a better place.
Why do you
Of
think we invited
course.
you on this podcast, Zohreh? We're trying to absorb
Dispute the
anything
knowledge,
we
yeah.
can get.
We're sucking you from a grape to a raisin, mama. We need that wisdom. Give it to us. But yeah, fear is, it's a ting. It's an emotion. It's real. And try to, I guess, realize where your triggers lie. Work through some of them.
Yeah. Being able to discern which fear is an actual hot stove versus just an illusion, a knee-jerk reaction, a trauma. Being able to be confident in your own vulnerability, as much of a paradox or juxtaposition that is. Being able to step into strength, feel strong, even though we're all human and have our own weaknesses. It's very important.
Yeah. Start to default distrust people. It's got me this far.
Open your heart. Let people in.
Close it. Lock it down.
Speak to your good friends, family members, people that give you good advice.
Unbiased third parties.
Yeah.
People who are in your corner and want the best for you. And cultivate that community for yourself, within yourself, and with others.
Yeah, because on the other side of your familiar hell is fear, and on the other side of fear, maybe an unfamiliar heaven that is just a few decisions away from a new paradise.
Step into your new paradise.
If you need help stepping into your new paradise, reach out to Cycle Health. We are a mental health company trying to connect you with mental health professionals all throughout the United States, hopefully India, Canada, Mexico, Europe soon. But as right now, if you're looking for therapy, psychiatry, you're not where you want to be, or you are dealing with, you know, some PTSD, anxiety, depression, all of the mental ailments, we're here to help. We are here to support you and help you find the care that you need, insurance-backed treatments, innovative treatments, holistic treatments, all the motherfucking treatments. So if you're looking for support, give us a call, give us a text, link in bio. And thanks for listening. Keep on keeping, bestie. You're going to work through this fear.
You got this. Break the cycle.
Break the cycle.